Hello, darling, and happy birthday twin. I hope that you are still relishing in the festivities. Um, I know for me, I had a really wonderful birthday, and then a lot of other things got triggered, and I am still kind of wading through that, to be honest. A lot of the emotions and things around family and birthdays and whatnot. So, um, I'm excited to share with you, though, a year ahead spread. Apologize for the noise. Um, and I've been kind of meditating on how we should go about this and what tools I should use to share with you. And one thing that came up is I'd like to share some archetypes with you, and I'm not sure we've done this yet. The beauty of an hour-long reading is that I get to share a lot more of my toys. I feel like half-hour readings are really good, but I feel like with the hour readings, I really get to dig into some other things that bring that shed more light on life. So, archetype cards is what we're working with here. I highly recommend her. Her name is said Mace, but it's spelled Myss, Carolyn Mace. She is wonderful. She was actually studying to be a Catholic nun, and in her late 20s, and then but she was, all throughout that time, she was aware that she was an intuitive healer. So she could literally look at someone, know what was going on with their body, and then give them recommendations for taking care of it. And so she pushed into that a little bit, and that really opened up the door to her for studying the chakra system, which is like the energy body. At least in yoga, that's what we call it. And then all kinds of other things. And she has written a considerable amount of books. If you really want to check one out, that's a good introductory for her. Anatomy of the Spirit is a great start. And they have a video series out there somewhere from like the 80s. This is what we studied in my yoga teacher training when we did our energy weekend, energy work weekend. And she talks about each of the 7 chakras, how they correspond to the physical, emotional, and mental bodies. It's like I live on the quietest residential street you could imagine, except these terrible construction trucks that, like, there's no predicting them. They're always passing through. Anyway, but she talks a lot about the 7 chakras and how they correspond with the physical, mental, and emotional bodies, and talks about what happens when certain traumas happen in each of those chakras, like how that affects the things, and then how the body. It's really fascinating. And like I said, that's called Anatomy of the Spirit. She has a book, but then there's also this video series. So with these archetype cards, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with archetypes, but Jungian psychology is Carl Jung, Jung. He did a lot of work with developing the concept of archetypes and then with writing about them. And then anyone who studies Jungian psychology, they are really familiar with archetypes. So archetypes are essentially, they're kind of like what I refer to as like stock characters, and they exist within us and then within the world. And we tend to have certain archetypes that are much stronger in us, that are at like our core. And then there are different seasons of life where we may live into or act out of a certain archetype. And once that season's over, it kind of fades away. So archetypes can be really fascinating. What I love about these cards, and I'll just show you one, is that she has the archetype at the top. So a magical child archetype is one thing, and it's got the light attributes and then the shadow attributes. So And there's even like the slave archetype, and it still has a light attribute and a shadow attribute. With the light attribute being, I would say, in its purest form, and the shadow attribute being kind of in its warped form. And what's important to remember is that even though the shadow is warped, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it needs to be brought into the light. And light, in the way that I understand it from a spiritual perspective, is correspondent with love. So capital L, love, divine love, pure love. And so when we can understand our shadowy parts, then we can also understand that they are really just pieces of ourselves that need to be brought into light and loved on. So when I share these cards, I would just really encourage you to kind of let go of the idea, the concept of good versus bad. And I know that's really challenging, because that is like all of the mythology that we buy into or that we study and believe it's all good versus evil, which is actually very Judeo-Christian of us. But I like to move more toward light versus shadow, and not really versus, but more so like kind of like the yin and the yang. Like when we see a yin yang symbol, it's like white and black, but they're like intermingled and interacting with one another. So it's just this reminder that our shadow is nothing to despise or reject, but rather something to try to understand and hold gently, and show lots of compassion to. So what I'm going to do, so this is kind of what we're going to do. I'm going to pick 3 archetype cards, and these are going to be cards that you can focus on over the next year. I would really encourage you, if you don't already, to get your journal have your journal handy, have a pen, get ready to go, because you're going to be scribbling a lot of notes. The thing about this reading, with it being a year ahead spread, is that it is it's not a lot of present day pulse checking, which is usually what a reading is, where you really feel like, wow, that resonates with me. Yeah, that resonates with me. This is a lot of future projection, a lot of future understanding before we know it to happen. And so making notes is going to be really helpful. The way that I structured my reading, my year ahead spread, is that I made like a column on the left for the reading, for the card name and the reading, and then anything that struck me. And then on the right, space to write and note what actually happened. And I find that that can be really helpful if you, at the end of every month, kind of recap your month and things that stuck out to you. And then you can compare them to what the reading suggested was going to happen, and just kind of see if there are parallels. Don't try to stretch anything or make it fit. Like, that's really not the point. But to see if there are any parallels or themes that ran through the reading and real life. And it's not necessary that you do that, but I think it is kind of fun to do. So, yeah, so then after we choose some of these cards, I'm going to do a spread with the Wildwood Tarot with the actual year ahead spread. And I will lay a card for June. So starting this year, since your birthday was on the 1st, I'll lay a card for June. And then go through May of 2020. So just so you know, that's kind of the game plan. 1 card for each month, and then a card that acts as the theme for the year ahead, for those 12 cards. And along with the theme card, I also am going to draw the Universe has your back card for the theme card. Okay, so though there will be both a Wildwood Tarot theme, and then there will be a theme that the universe wants you to focus on in reminding yourself that you are supported and loved, and that you have all the resources you need. So So I had a card jump out here. We're just going to roll with that as being one of your 3 archetype cards. All right. All right, so card number 1. So these are the archetypes for you to focus on over the next year. And this might be a good place to write down any impressions you have of the initial archetype, okay? And that way you can kind of see, not in the immediate moment, but you can see when you come back to it if there was any biases or predispositions to how you felt about that archetype. And especially if they're negative, you can see like, oh, that's not me. You know, like a lot of times we tend, when something feels negative to us, we want to distance ourselves, right? Like we don't want people to see us that way. And I'm saying that because there are a couple cards here. I have a feeling that might be the response. Appearances can become very important to us when we're confronted with a mirror image. So just note, like, if there are some immediate feelings or adverse reactions, just write those down. Like, it's okay. It's okay to disagree and be disturbed. Like, I know you've had readings with me before, but I talk about resonance, right? Like when something stirs something in you, that doesn't mean it's always light and sunshine and rainbows. Like sometimes it stirs up old ideas and patterns and things that aren't serving us and are only serving as baggage that we're carrying around, and it's time really to cut ourselves loose from. So again, just note things that come up. Right now with this reading, you are in what I call a data collection phase, okay? So you're just literally writing down without judgment anything that strikes you, anything that comes to mind, whether it's an image, a sense, a sensory response, like a smell or a song lyric, anything like that. One of the things I've been reading The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Let me grab that and I'll show you what it looks like in case you haven't read it. This is a brilliant work about trauma, and it can be for anyone who has PTSD, but he especially pays attention to childhood trauma, which I think has been really helpful to me, but also really triggering to me. So one of the things, though, he talks about is how, especially as children, traumatic memories, although it's not just children, it's really everyone. When a traumatic memory gets stored into your memory bank, the way that it does that, it's generally not linear, like where it's step by step. It's generally done using sensory items. So what you smelled at the time, a song that was on the radio when it happened, something someone said, right? I know one of my memories is like something someone said is right there. If you were eating a meal or you had gum in your mouth, like a taste or a flavor, all of that is how the memory gets stored. And so that's where we come up with triggers where when a smell or a song or a voice comes back to us, it can really can bring that memory up and send us into a spiral. So I don't know why I shared all that with you, except that it felt like I needed to, and just to let you know that it's good, especially to pay attention to the sensory things that come up all throughout the reading, but especially with these archetypes. So, all right, archetype number 1, we have the gossip. All right, so light attributes: awakens consideration for the feelings of others, honors trust. Shadow attribute: thrives on the power of passing on private or secret information, betraying confidences. And I want to see if the book has anything more to add to those 2 things. Connected to lessons of truth, integrity, and honoring the trust another has placed in you. And so what I see that as is like, you may be coming into a season over the, like sometime over the next year where someone is going to place considerable trust in you and share with you some things that was really juicy information. Um, and it's really a lesson, and maybe not even a lesson, it may be a test of everything you've learned about honoring the trust, recognizing that someone has put incredible trust in you and sharing that information, um, and then honoring it by not sharing it with other people. Um, I have to say, this is something that's been challenging for me in my life because I like context a lot. So, for example, I have a friend who's making some interesting, erratic decisions lately. And when I was sharing my concern for the decisions she's making, um, I like to process, I was trying to process like what I understood about the context that she was in. And I said, my understanding is she has considerable PTSD and she's making these decisions out of that. Like PTSD jumping is kind of what I call it, where you jump from thing to thing, trying to avoid your PTSD symptoms. And then someone asked what her trauma was, and that was really kind of the boundary line for me, because she has shared that in confidence with me, and it is a very tender and private thing, and there's really not any reason for this person to know who's asked, except that they're curious, because I said I did say she had PTSD. And that's one thing she shares pretty openly, so I didn't feel like I was violating a trust there. But I think it's, when there is a piece of information you want to share, it's good to come back and ask yourself why it is that you want to share that. And so the bottom of this says, assess how many of your life lessons have emerged from participating in gossip that has harmed another, or from rating a relationship by whether a person is willing to share secrets with you. That can be challenging too. Both shadowy things. Okay, another archetype, Queen. Light attributes, radiates the regal feminine, uses her benevolent authority to protect others. Shadow attributes, becomes arrogant when authority is challenged, controlling and demanding. So just another energy for you to reflect on over the next year, be aware of. And I think the beauty of the Queen especially is I call it they say regal feminine, I call it divine feminine, where it's the feminine that is in its purest form. And um, and so as you're moving through situations in your life, recognizing where things have shifted toward the divine feminine for you, and by that I mean like inside of you, not just inside of you. Shadow attributes, again, just being being aware that the shadow attributes do exist. And so many times awareness is really all we need, right? I talk about like kind of steps to take, and then do this and then do that. And sometimes that's necessary, but I feel like in this situation, awareness is really going to bring you to the next step, the next decision that you need to make. So practice being aware, and especially of the shifts and changes in your life where these archetypes may surface in an instant or a situation, and then kind of take the bench again. All right, third archetype to consider is the martyr. And the martyr, light attribute, learning the transcendent nature of service to oneself or a cause, right? So we think about a martyr, it's usually someone who's like works themselves to death for a cause or a person, and then when they don't recognize it, they get butthurt, right? Like they're like, nah. And so what I like about the light attribute of that energy is that you can serve other people with purity without baggage or strings attached. The shadow attribute is addiction to self-pity. And yeah, let's see what the book says, if the book has anything to add. With the Queen, we'll go back to that for a minute. It said it's associated with positive arrogance, which I take as like confidence, and a need to protect one's personal and emotional power. The Shadow Queen can slip into aggressive and destructive patterns of behavior, particularly when authority or control is challenged. Look for a pattern of authoritative control of others throughout your life. And then the Martyr has the courage of one's convictions, going so far as to die for a cause. Suffers that others may be redeemed, either spiritually or politically. Shadow Martyr utilizes a combination of service and suffering for others as a means of controlling and manipulating them. And that's related to the victim archetype. Look for a pattern of giving yourself to causes for the betterment of others, regardless of the consequences. All right. So those are the archetypes. Those are some things to think about. Really like these cards. When I first came to Bastyr, the school I'm at to visit, I was in the bookstore. They gave us like a 20% off coupon or whatever to the bookstore, and so we got like a sweatshirt and stuff. And then they had these cards, and my therapist had used these in therapy, and I was like, I'm totally getting those. Those are my cards now, and I love them. Okay, so let's get to it. I haven't shuffled these yet, so I'm just going to take a minute or two to shuffle and focus on you and the messages that need to come forward. And I've invited in any of your guides or higher self to also help guide this reading. What I've been telling people recently is if you when you write things down, make sure you write down what you hear and what you understand, because that is, I believe, one of the ways spirits talks to us is by kind of translating what we hear into what we need, and as individuals need to hear. So don't worry so much about recording, and I probably said this to you before, but about recording what I say down word for word. Instead, write down what comes to you. Make it very personal. And then that way, also, you're going to learn to trust your own intuition, because when you write down your interpretation of a thing, and then that is the thing that actually comes to fruition, you will begin to trust your intuition so much better. And that's going to really help guide you forward. So. I also washed these in some Palo Santo smoke, or I guess it's sage smoke, while I saged, so they should be good and clean. Clear anyway, of any past energies. But still, you only want to pay attention to the resonance so that you know what is for you and what is not for you. Let's do one more here. It's so funny, like, as much as I shuffled, I still got cards that were from my reading. So I think it's interesting. I have found that a lot of times with readings, like the messages that are coming through are messages that are something we're collectively dealing with, and so I get similar messages for people, but in a way that's still unique to them. It's kind of interesting. All right. So I will show you this here shortly, but I want to go ahead and also pick Universe Has Your Back card for the theme. Because that a lot of times helps me to understand where a reading is coming from and what aspect of it I need to focus on for you. It's looking for my cup of water. All right. All right, so here's our theme for the next year. When I think I've surrendered, I surrender more. When I think I've surrendered, I surrender more. And what I love about this is there's no actual, okay, you've surrendered. Like, that doesn't mean you've won the game. That just means that maybe you've come a little bit further to surrendering everything and trusting that your life has its own flow and purpose. So when you've come to that point where you're like, ooh, I've surrendered. Surrender some more. All right, here's your spread. And see if we can get it all. All right, so June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. Theme for the year. Okay, that goes right in the middle. All right, let me see if I can find my water. And then we'll dive into this. All right. So the June card is the Page of Arrows, and we have a wren here. And the thing about the wren, it's a very industrious animal. And it reminds me, every time I pull it, it reminds me of this image in a memory that I have when I used to work at a yoga studio in Indianapolis, and there were bushes that, I mean, they'd lost all their leaves and everything, gone into hibernation, but in these bushes were just like packs and packs and hordes of wrens, and they were in there, and they're just during the winter, and winters in Indianapolis are pretty brutal, like snow, wind, cold, nasty, brutal, and can be really, really cold. But here are all these little wrens like staying warm and chirping and singing still, even during the winter, and surviving winter after winter. And to see them as very industrious animals, but also very communal driven. Like they know they have to stay close to one another to survive. So anyway, there's a sense here that the snow is melting, that winter is passing, spring is finally arriving. And I would say with June, there is that sense that you've passed through the hardest points, and now you're just kind of waiting for the ice to melt and to thaw, and you're going to move into spring. I know for me, that's definitely been the case. Like, there was a very, very definitive shift for me between 35 and 36, when it was really interesting to pay attention to. So pay attention to that this month. Notice where the hard is dissolving away and the new life is rising forward. And it's a really good month to share gratitude for that. So a daily gratitude list actually might be really helpful to you during this month, because it will help tune your sensitivity to the shifts and the changes that are happening, because they are all in your favor. And gratitude is also an energy that vibrates so high, it attracts other high vibrating things to it. And so when you practice gratitude, you are essentially raising your vibration and therefore raising the potential to attract more high vibe things, whether it's a new job or living situation, take ways that you like to take care of yourself, like self-care items, even just abundance in general. I yeah, I know for myself, I've been watching like interesting manifestations happening. Um, and so, for example, there are things I've had on my list, like I'm brewing kombucha, homemade kombucha. Thing I didn't realize is that you need a second fermentation, like you do for primary fermentation, then you do a second fermentation, and you do that in bottleneck bottles so that um, it creates the carbon dioxide's able to, it stays trapped, and so it creates that like bubbly effect of kombucha. And I haven't had money to buy these bottles. So I was like, man, well, tomorrow, maybe if I get I'll get paid on Wednesday and maybe I'll go buy some bottles and decant this, like change over this kombucha I've been making. And then I'm helping my boyfriend kind of clean and straighten his room last night. And what does he have? One of those bottles, like a large bottle that would be great for my kombucha. And I was just like, hey, are you using this? Like, can I use this for my kombucha? And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. It's like a growler, where anyway. And then I've also been needing a car wash for my car. Like I go to get it serviced. They're like, oh, here's a coupon for a free car wash. I'm like, no, okay. So just interesting manifestations. And I think a lot of that has to do with gratitude work that I've been doing recently. So I would just encourage you to adopt some gratitude practices for yourself. Expressing gratitude and holding that vibration during meditation is also really helpful. Okay, July, Queen of Vessels. We have the salmon here. And vessels being emotional work here. So, associated with the emotional world. And so July, what I see happening is that it's going to be some really intense emotional work that you're doing, and it's going to feel as if you're swimming upstream. But the thing about the salmon is, right, they do this work to fulfill the most important work of their lives, which is spawning, which is creation, right? Creating the next generation. And so there's kind of this sense of like the work you're doing is going to be long-term work and multi-generational work. So, but it's going to be difficult. And at the same time, it's going to be the most important work you've ever done. So even in the times when it feels like you're swimming upstream, just keep swimming, right? Finding Nemo, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. So that's July. July is just keep swimming. August, we have the Seven of Vessels, which is morning. So for some reason, this reminded me of a picnic. But all the food bowls are empty, and there's actually that person's gone. So it's this sense of like missing what was, seeing shadows of what has happened or what used to be, and mourning that. And that's okay. Like, mourning needs to happen. Grief is very much a part of the process of growing and evolving and changing. And if you need to take extra time in the month of August to grieve some of the things that are no longer in your life, I think that is highly recommended. Okay, September, 10 of Vessels. We have happiness. And so to me, you've got this stream of vessels. The work that you're doing emotionally is going to start to show up and pay off in the month of September. You're going to really find that the work you've been doing has helped clear some blockages for you. So, whereas this one, Seven of Vessels for August, seems pretty dry, I would argue that that's because something's in the way, and that's probably your grief. So when you really allow yourself to grieve, we think that we're getting lost in our grief, but the reality is we're actually working through blockages so that other emotions can flow through more easily. And that's what I see here is like there's been this release of water of the emotions, and that is resulting in a deeper state of happiness. So where it may feel difficult and challenging for a couple months, you're going to feel the relief of that and the reward of that in September. Okay, October, we have Six of Arrows, which is transition. So a lot of the work you've been doing emotionally is going to begin to transition to some other work that is more present and more next level, next stage. So these next few months are going to be really important. I want you to know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. So if you can embrace and do the emotional work over the next few months, you will find in October that you're in a time of transition where all you've known for several months is a deep, hard emotional work, and that's going to start to alleviate. And you may find in October that you don't quite know where you are anymore or what you're supposed to be doing, and that's okay because you're actually upgrading in that month to the higher version of yourself and to the legacy path, if you will, that is going to be a lot more focused on the future rather than the past. So in the next few months, if you can really work through the things of the past that have affected you and the emotions that surround that, you're going to find in October that you're graduating essentially. Okay, you're graduating to the next level, and that things are shifting. And if you find that, like, I kind of picture like being on a boat and how that feels, where it's like you can't get you takes a minute to get your footing, right? But then eventually, like the muscles in your body and your brain, like the balance that's needed, and also the muscles that hold the body steady, they start to really adapt. And so just give yourself some time to get your sea legs. Like, you don't need to worry about moving through the transition perfectly. In fact, it's not even you that's moving you through the transition. It's life. Like, it's the universe rising up to meet you and saying, okay, come get on my boat. I'm going to take you to the next land that you're going to work through. So that's October. November, Six of Vessels, which is reunion. And I would say this is a coming back to yourself kind of situation where a lot of the work you've done is because you've lost a piece of yourself, and you've had your part of what's happening is that you're needing to redefine who you are, and that's really going to start to come together in November of this year, where your identity swings back to center. Like, I kind of get this image of a pendulum, like swinging, but then it really comes back to center, and you start to get a better idea of who you are and where you're going. And so yeah, November, coming back to yourself, which is interesting because like all of the trees in this image are barren. So there is almost a sense that like, yeah, it's the fall, and like things are changing. Things are definitely changing. Okay. December is the Wanderer. And this is the very first card in the Major Arcana deck. It corresponds with the Fool in the traditional tarot. And what I like about the Wanderer here, though, as opposed to the Fool, is the emphasis on wandering as a way of finding oneself. And so, and also I love that there's a rainbow bridge here. Like there's really a sense with this card in particular that you're stepping out. You're stepping out into the unknown, and so the few months leading up to this, the transition and then coming back into yourself, those are really valid tools for stepping out into the unknown, especially the coming back to yourself that happens in November, because and November is going to be a really good month to do daily meditation if you don't already have that as a part of your practice, because the meditation will help you sit with yourself and understand the pieces that are coming back to you and how they fit into the bigger picture. Okay, so meditation November, if you're not already doing a daily meditation, if you are, maybe you bump it up 5 or 10 minutes each session. Okay, something to think about. But the Wanderer is here for December, and there's what I love about this is that it definitely has very much a feeling of summer and growth and change, but it's a December card. So it's going to feel like, even though December may be cold and feel wintry and whatnot, it's going to have this like overarching theme of being like new and springy and bright and green. And you may be like, this is interesting. Like, technically, I'm supposed to be going into hibernation according to the world around me, but I actually feel like really branching out and trying new things and being more risky and daring. And I would say go with that energy. Okay, that is where this path is leading you, is into a place of you've done the healing work, you've cleared up the grief, you've really prepared yourself, you've reunited with yourself, you're ready to step out and take risks. And December, I think, is going to present you with some interesting opportunities for doing that. Go with it. Like, give gratitude for the energy and roll with it. Just let it take you along. But it's different. It's not like the transition where you're in a boat, right, for October, where you're really being taken through the transition. This is much more dependent on you putting one foot forward. And you may be like, well, that feels too good to be true. Well, a rainbow bridge does feel too good to be true. Like, who doesn't want to be able to step off and walk onto a rainbow bridge? But you're going to have those doubting parts of yourself that are like, a rainbow bridge, whatever, that doesn't exist. It is too good to be true, and it doesn't exist. Not true. The rainbow bridge is there to support you, and that rainbow bridge being the thing that will take you from where you are into the next places that you're going to go. January. All right. January is 10 of Stones, which is home. Actually, I want to go back to the Wanderer. I'm feeling like I need to pull that up here, because major arcanas do tend to have a much more powerful impact and message behind them. And so I really want to see what the Wanderer has to say. Poised on the edge of a white chalk cliff, the Wanderer prepares to step across the abyss into the wildwood beyond. Ahead lies the faint suggestion of a rainbow arch, onto which the Wanderer must step. This leap across the void is greeted with open arms and a deep trust that the wings of imagination and honesty will carry the figure onto the lush green turf of a new path. Clothed in bark and the soft green mosses and foliage that symbolize the protective and healing essences of nature, the Wanderer is neither strongly male nor female, both genders combining in the slender body. The figure's naked feet tread lightly on the sweet warm grass at the cliff edge. And across the divide, deep shadowed trees stand ready to receive this newcomer to the wildwood. Amid the leaves of the tangled wood is the merest suggestion of a face, perhaps the spirit of the wood. Meaning, at this moment, the burdens of the past are set aside, either for the wanderer to pick up and take along, or to leave behind if the weight is too great. I want you to focus on that, okay? You have a choice, either to take them with you or leave them behind if the weight is too great. This is where it's going to be really important that you've tuned into yourself, that you have a practice of tuning into yourself, and that you practice some really strong self-compassion and self-love. If the burden's too great, leave it behind. You have the choice, okay? The wheel of the year is beginning its great cycle, bringing a new range of possibilities and challenges. The wanderer is ready to make the leap into the unknown. All that is required is faith. The wanderer represents the wisdom or courage to let go, to step into the void of the possible. Something within you may have already begun this unconscious, instinctive leap across the abyss. You know it is time to move on. Sometimes the fear of loss or failure may make you doubt the validity of change. You may want to wait or hesitate at the critical moment because of the comfort of security, but the momentum of the great wheel has already sent the true heart of the wanderer into the future, leaping across the gap with courage and joy. Now the figure must leave the burdens that have been carried for so long and trust to the wings of imagination. The wanderer is both an end and a beginning, which is interesting because it's in December, and December is the end, but when New Year's Eve comes, we also celebrate the beginning, right? Interesting. One journey has already come full circle, and as you distill your life experience into sacred memory and put the past and its burdens to rest, the future waits patiently for you to make the first move. Remember that your wisdom, strength, and whatever personal experiences and skills you have may not help you now. The honest spirit of human inquisitiveness leads you beyond yourself and into a new life. This unconscious energy creates a rainbow bridge that rises and greets your foot. It will carry you over the void as you step, trusting and empowered, into the unknown. All right, that was a lot. Let's go back to January. We have the 10 of Stones, which is home. And I know this is like looking out at a building, and it's really easy to assume this is home, but I actually think this archway is home. And I think December is going to have such tremendous momentum for you of feeling like, yes, I can do this, stepping out into the void. And January is going to roll around, and it's going to be like, actually, I'm okay to hide behind the windows and the doors of my comfort zone. So if you need to retreat for rest, by all means do it. If you're retreating out of fear, recognize that part of you. It's okay to say, hey, what part of me is afraid? And when you get that part of you, just say, I hear you. I understand you're afraid. It's perfectly reasonable that you're afraid, but we're going to do this anyway, and I want you to know that I am by your side every step of the way. I'm never going to leave you or forsake you, okay? So January could be a challenging month with having to really confront what your fears are and what those parts of you are that are afraid. And I really believe that as you show them compassion and tenderness and kindness, but still firmly pushing them forward, you'll be able to work through the fear and you'll be able to move beyond your comfort zone. Okay, January, February, Ace of Stones, the foundation of life. And so Ace being, the beginning, stones representing the material world. So there is a sense of starting something new here. It's very ground level. So it may not feel like much, but it's actually the most important piece of the future part of your journey because it's the foundation. And so patience is of the utmost importance in this month and this phase of things, because it will, patience will allow the foundation to be laid in a way that where it's strong and capable and um, sustainable. Okay, so you really, when we talk about foundations, right, we don't want a foundation for a house that's like, oh, it's got a 20-year lifespan. Like, no, we want to know that that foundation is going to last for the entire life of the house, or the building or whatever it is that you're building. So this is a really important time. I think about like gestation, like and I've not been pregnant, but I understand pregnancy. I understand other people's understanding of pregnancy, I should say. And that is like when you've got that baby like growing, especially at like those beginning months when things are like really coming into place, you want those things to come into place properly, right? And in a way that makes sense and is healthy for the baby. We don't want to force something to be born that isn't yet whole and fully put together. So that's February. March, 9 of Vessels, generosity. Vessels, we got a lot of emotional stuff here. A lot of emotional stuff coming up. Generosity. Generosity towards self is really what keeps coming to mind. So when March rolls around, just make sure that you're being very, you've spent a lot of time over the next year, leading up to March of 2020, tuning into yourself, learning how to respond with compassion and love and grace. Now it's time to add generosity to that. It's kind of the next level, right? We can't really know how to be generous toward ourselves until we've learned how to be compassionate to ourselves, until we've learned how to love ourselves. Because we don't tend to be generous unless we feel that the object of our generosity deserves it. So if you really want to be generous towards yourself, you need to develop this sense of worth, of self-worth, and deep value of yourself. And that's what those months leading up to March are doing, is really developing your intuition and your sensitivity toward your own value. April, we have the 9 of Bows. Not surprising that respect is coming up next. Not only respect for yourself, which I think by this point you will have already understood, but allowing then respect from the outside world to flow into your world. Accepting respect, even demanding respect, right? Like, how does it feel? And you may not know now because it's not until April of next year, which is almost a year away. But there is a sense of like, shh, I have the tools. I have everything I need for my support and my existence. Respect me. Like, I am a person worthy of respect, right? Coming back to our generosity thing, like, I think what will come out of that is like, okay, so I'm not really even getting that you're going to have to demand respect. What I'm getting is that the energy will just shift toward you getting more respect. And April's really going to be about figuring out how to let that respect in, how to accept it, how to not demean it or dismiss it. And also how to give it back. Like, a lot of times we think of like, I demand respect. And what that means then is that you get respect, but you don't give it to others. And that's been kind of the toxic patriarchal system that we've been in, where, the head of the household, he demands respect, but then doesn't respect the people in his household. And I'm talking about in an unhealthy environment. Okay. So learning both how to accept respect, but then also to equally give it out, so that you have this really symbiotic mutually beneficial relationship between yourself and those you're interacting with. Um, what may be a good, um, like, pulse check here is if you find that you're giving respect and not getting respect. Okay, so when you find that the flip is true, and maybe even um, maybe even recognizing that those are people who should no longer be closer to you. Okay, so you're gonna find that these cycles that we are in, where you're going to do tremendous work over the next few months of letting go. Um, this cycle, there are cycles in our lives, like letting go, growing, finding abundance, letting go of another layer, growing, finding. It's like so you're going to cycle back through where you may need to refine your relationships a little bit more. And I don't anticipate that's going to be anything dramatic. Like, that's not the sense I'm getting, but there will be a little bit of refinement happening. The sensitivity you've been developing in the months leading up to this is going to really serve you well, because it may be a situation where, this at this time in your life, you would totally allow it. But then as you grow more sensitive and develop more attunement to yourself, you start to realize, like, wow, that's really not serving me. So it's a more refined place that you're going to be coming to in about a year from now. And then last but not least, for the year cards, May, Six of Bows, which is abundance. And that's kind of what I was just saying, is like, you let go, you grow abundance. You let go, you grow abundance. And so naturally, the thing that you're going to be facing in May is more of a sense of abundance, which is kind of nice leading up to your next birthday. And then your theme card. So the Page of Bows, which is the Stoat. And I'd like to look him up. I don't know the Stoat as well. It's an interesting animal, and that might be an animal that you look up, like, to see if there are any spirit totem cards, or like meanings or understandings of the Stoat. So with the fierce hunting instinct and its ability to live underground, combined with the changing color of its fur from white to red and its black tail, the three sacred colors of the ancient world, the Stoat has strong mystical links to the sovereignty of the land. It's a very grounded feeling animal, even though he's like up in the air in this card. It's interesting. Often you are seen as an emissary, and as such, your gifts are widely recognized and honored. Your ability to perceive the truth in almost any matter is vastly helpful, and your freedom of spirit marks you out as an original and unique personality. So keeping in mind, again, this is a theme for the entire next year. And I think that's why a lot of this refinement is happening, because you are seen as an emissary. You are someone whose gifts are looked toward as a guide. An emissary goes between parties. Like, it speaks for one party to another, and I would see that as like you speaking for it's going to sound cheesy, but like the heart of love. You kind of coming to people within your life and showing them this way of self-love, self-compassion. You're almost like translating for them, like, hey, this is what it means, what love with a capital L means, and how it sets us free. And in order to be that kind of like living example for people, you really do need to be refined. So just keep that in mind over the next year, that there's good reason for the process that's happening to you. Yeah. And then, of course, coming back to our universe has your back card. When I think I've surrendered, I surrender more. And honestly, that makes so much sense for the year that I see coming up for you, because you are going to be going through some really interesting refining periods and healing processes. That it's important to remember surrender happens in layers. And so when you surrender that first layer, that's going to be enough for that moment. But you are going to have to surrender again and again and again. Um, so it's it's um, it's not a bad thing when you're coming to the next level of surrender. Let that serve as an encouragement that you have worked through that layer and you're ready for the next one. All right, which means there's progress, there's forward progress, and eventually, very soon, you're going to be at a point where you're focusing more on growth and development and stepping out into the unknown. All right, we are at the hour mark. Thank you so much for letting me share. These are always really fun to do, especially the year ahead. I'd love to hear any feedback as you go forward. And happy birthday month. I look forward to working more with you in the future. And also, just a little housekeeping. You do still have a $5 credit with me for referrals from Connie Morgan. So keep that in mind for your next reading. And if you felt like this was useful, of course, I would love more referrals, more people that you feel would genuinely receive a reading with. Who would genuinely be ready to receive a reading for themselves. So many blessings to you, darling, over the next year. Namaste.